Why you turn around when you feel someone behind you. You've felt it 1,000 times, that creeping sensation crawling up your spine, that invisible pressure on the back of your neck, that absolute certainty that someone is standing behind you, even though you haven't seen or heard a thing. And here's the kicker. When you whip around to check, you're often right. There's actually someone there, staring at you, and you detected them through some mechanism that science supposedly says shouldn't exist. Most people just shrug this off as coincidence or some vague sixth sense. But what if I told you that this simple, everyday experience reveals one of the most profound mysteries in human behavior? One that challenges everything mainstream psychology claims to understand about perception, consciousness, and the limits of human awareness. The ability to sense when you're being watched isn't supernatural, but it's not exactly normal either. It sits in that uncomfortable zone where dark psychology meets unexplained phenomena, where your rational mind insists it's impossible, while your direct experience screams that it's absolutely real. This isn't about believing in ghosts or psychic powers. This is about understanding that your brain is processing information in ways that go far beyond the 5 senses you learned about in grade school, and the implications are staggering. Here's what nobody wants to admit. Modern neuroscience has no satisfactory explanation for this phenomenon. Sure, they'll throw out theories about peripheral vision, subtle sound cues, or air pressure changes, and those factors sometimes contribute, but they don't explain the full picture. They don't explain why you can sense someone staring at you through a window when you're facing away, or why you turn around in a crowded room and lock eyes with the one person who was looking directly at you, or why this feeling is so consistently accurate that it's shaped human behavior throughout our entire evolutionary history. Weird psychology research has documented this experience across every culture, every time period, every demographic. It's as universal as fear or hunger, yet mainstream science treats it like an embarrassing relative nobody wants to talk about at family dinner. The truth is that strange and unusual psychological phenomena like this threaten the comfortable materialist model that says consciousness is just neurons, firing and everything else is illusion. If you can genuinely detect attention directed at you without any conventional sensory input, then what does that say about the nature of consciousness, the reality of connection between minds, and the invisible information fields that your brain might be tapping into every single day? Let me guess what you're thinking right now. But I've turned around before and nobody was there, so doesn't that prove it's just paranoia or imagination? Here's where it gets interesting. Dark psychology shows us that your hit rate, the percentage of times you correctly detect someone watching you, is significantly above chance, even when accounting for false positives. Yes, you'll sometimes turn around and find nothing, but you'll be right far more often than random guessing would predict. Studies have shown this effect repeatedly, though mainstream scientists dismiss the results or refuse to replicate them because the implications are too uncomfortable. Think about what this means. Your nervous system is detecting something real, but we don't have the conceptual framework to explain what that something is. Maybe it's electromagnetic fields generated by focused attention. Maybe it's quantum entanglement between conscious observers. Maybe it's something even weirder that we don't have the physics to describe yet. The point is that your direct experience is valid, the phenomenon is measurable, and the fact that we can't explain it says more about the limitations of current science than about the reality of what you're experiencing. This is information your ancestors needed to survive, the ability to detect predators, enemies, or threats before direct confrontation. And evolution doesn't preserve useless capabilities across millions of years. So what are you going to discover in this deep dive into one of human behavior's most fascinating mysteries? You're about to explore the cutting edge where psychology, neuroscience, quantum physics, and consciousness research collide in spectacular fashion. We're going to dismantle the comfortable myths about how perception works and reveal the hidden mechanisms that let you navigate a social world far richer and stranger than you've been taught to believe. You'll understand why liminal spaces make your skin crawl, how your brain suppresses thoughts in ways that backfire catastrophically, why your original ideas might not be as original as you think, and how consciousness itself might operate on quantum principles that make impossible experiences suddenly explicable. We're diving into strange and unusual psychological phenomena that will fundamentally shift how you understand your own mind. your connection to others, and the nature of reality itself. This isn't surface-level pop psychology. This is the deep stuff, the material that changes how you experience every moment of your life. By the end, you'll never dismiss that feeling of being watched as mere imagination again, because you'll understand that your awareness extends far beyond the narrow bandwidth you've been told defines human perception. Ready to discover what your mind is really capable of. Psychology of anomalous experiences. You know that feeling when reality seems to glitch for a second, when something happens that makes absolutely no sense, yet you can't shake it off. That's what we call an anomalous experience, and trust me, your brain is having a field day trying to make sense of it. These moments aren't just random, they're windows into how our minds work when confronted with the unexplainable. Dark psychology teaches us that our brains are constantly filtering reality, deciding what's normal and what's weird, but sometimes that filter breaks down. When it does, we're left standing in the middle of strange and unusual psychological phenomena, wondering if we've lost our minds, or if there's something deeper going on. The truth is, these experiences are more common than you think, and they reveal fascinating aspects of human behavior that most people never explore. Your mind isn't broken. It's just showing you a side of reality that doesn't fit the usual script. Let's talk about what actually happens during these moments. Imagine you're walking alone at night, and suddenly you feel an overwhelming presence, like someone's watching you even though there's nobody there. Your heart races, your skin tingles, and every instinct screams that something's off. This isn't paranoia, it's your brain processing information in a way that doesn't match your expectations. Weird psychology tells us that our minds are prediction machines, constantly forecasting what should happen next based on past experiences. When reality doesn't match those predictions, your brain throws up red flags, and you experience something that feels supernatural or impossible. Scientists call this predictive coding error, but what it really means is that your mind is desperately trying to fill in gaps with whatever makes sense, even if that means conjuring up ghosts, demons, or alternate dimensions. The fascinating part? These experiences aren't hallucinations. They're your brain's honest attempt to make sense of incomplete information. Now here's where it gets really interesting. These anomalous experiences don't just happen randomly, they follow patterns. People who experience high levels of stress, sleep deprivation, or intense emotional states are far more likely to report these moments. Think about it. When was the last time you felt something unexplainable? Were you exhausted, grieving, going through a major life change? Your mental state creates the perfect conditions for strange and unusual psychological phenomena to emerge. It's like your brain is running on low battery, and suddenly all the weird background processes start showing up on screen. Dark psychology researchers have found that certain personality traits, like high openness to experience, creativity, and even childhood trauma, make people more susceptible to these experiences. This doesn't mean you're crazy. It means your mind is wired to perceive reality in a more fluid, less rigid way than others. Some of the most brilliant artists, writers, and innovators throughout history have reported these experiences. People like Nikola Tesla, who claimed to see detailed visions of his inventions, or Edgar Allan Poe, whose work was deeply influenced by his own strange perceptions. But here's the real question. Are these experiences revealing something true about reality, or are they just tricks of the mind? The answer might surprise you. Modern research in weird psychology suggests that anomalous experiences might actually be your brain accessing information in unconventional ways. When you sense someone behind you before you see them, or when you have a dream that later comes true, you're not necessarily experiencing something supernatural. You might be processing subtle cues that your conscious mind hasn't noticed yet. Your peripheral vision caught a shadow. Your ears picked up a footstep. Your intuition connected dots that logic couldn't reach. Human behavior is full of these sixth sense moments that science is only beginning to understand. The line between psychological phenomenon and genuine perception is thinner than we ever imagined. And these experiences are teaching us that reality might be far stranger and more complex than the neat boxes we try to put it in. Ironic process theory, the paradox of thought suppression. Ever tried really hard not to think about something, only to find it completely taking over your mind? Like when someone says, "Don't think about a pink elephant," and suddenly that's all you can see in your head. Welcome to one of the most frustrating quirks of human behavior, the ironic process theory. This psychological phenomenon proves that your brain has a twisted sense of humor, because the harder you try to suppress a thought, the more powerful it becomes. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The more force you use, the more violently it wants to pop back up. Dark psychology researchers discovered this back in the 1980s, and it's been messing with people's heads ever since. The crazy part? Your brain isn't trying to sabotage you. It's actually following a perfectly logical process that just happens to produce the opposite result of what you want. Understanding this mechanism is crucial because it affects everything from addiction recovery to anxiety management, and most people spend their entire lives fighting against it without knowing why they keep losing. Let me break down exactly how this works, because once you see it, you'll notice it everywhere. Your mind operates on two parallel systems when you try to suppress a thought. The first system is the operating process. This is the conscious part that actively tries to distract you from the unwanted thought. Think of it as the security guard who's supposed to keep certain thoughts out. The second system is the monitoring process. This runs in the background, constantly scanning your mind to check if the forbidden thought has snuck back in. Here's the problem. To check if you're thinking about something, your mind has to reference that exact thing. It's like asking, am I thinking about chocolate cake right now? You can't answer that question without thinking about chocolate cake. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena like this reveal how your unconscious mind works in ways that seem completely counterintuitive. The monitoring process keeps bringing up the very thing you're trying to avoid, and when you're stressed, tired, or distracted, the operating process weakens while the monitoring process keeps running at full speed. Result? The thought explodes into consciousness with even more intensity than before. Let's talk real-world applications, because this isn't just theoretical. It's ruining people's lives every single day. Imagine someone trying to quit smoking. They tell themselves, I will not think about cigarettes, I will not think about cigarettes. And what happens? They become obsessed with cigarettes. Every conversation, every moment of stress, every quiet minute becomes dominated by the one thing they're trying to avoid. Or consider someone with intrusive thoughts, maybe violent images or disturbing scenarios that pop into their head. The natural response is to push them away, to fight them, to declare war on these thoughts. But weird psychology shows us that this strategy backfires catastrophically. The more you fight, the stronger they become. This is why traditional just stop thinking about it advice is not only useless, it's actively harmful. Therapists who understand this phenomenon teach the opposite approach: acknowledgement and acceptance. Instead of fighting the thought, you observe it without judgment. Let it float by like a cloud. Books like The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris and Unwinding Anxiety by Judson Brewer explore these techniques in detail, showing you how to work with your mind instead of against it. The implications of ironic process theory stretch into every corner of human experience, from performance, anxiety to insomnia to relationship conflicts. Athletes who tell themselves don't miss this shot are far more likely to choke under pressure because their monitoring process is constantly checking for failure. People who desperately try to fall asleep can't, precisely because they're monitoring whether they're asleep yet, which requires being awake. Someone trying to appear confident in a social situation thinks, don't be awkward, and becomes hyper-aware of every gesture, every word, every pause, creating the exact awkwardness they feared. Dark psychology reveals that this mechanism can even be weaponized. If you want to make someone obsess over something, just tell them not to think about it. Advertisers know this, manipulators know this, and your own anxious mind uses this against you every day. The path forward isn't suppression. It's understanding that thoughts are just mental events, not commands or predictions. When you stop treating certain thoughts as dangerous enemies that must be defeated, they lose their power. Your mind becomes quieter, not through force, but through a paradoxical kind of surrender that most people never discover. Cryptomnesia, hidden memory, disguised as original thought. Have you ever had what felt like a brilliant, completely original idea, only to discover later that you'd actually heard it somewhere before? That uncomfortable moment when you realize your genius insight was actually borrowed from a book you read years ago, or a conversation you'd completely forgotten. This is cryptomnesia, and it's one of the most humbling experiences in human behavior. Your brain is essentially plagiarizing itself without telling you, taking stored memories and repackaging them as fresh original thoughts. The wild part, you're not lying or trying to steal credit. You genuinely believe the idea is yours. Dark psychology researchers have shown that this happens to everyone, from world-famous musicians accidentally recreating melodies they heard in childhood, to scientists discovering theories that were actually proposed decades earlier. Your memory isn't a filing cabinet where everything sits in neat, labeled folders. It's more like a chaotic art studio where old sketches get mixed with new ones, and you can't always tell which is which. This phenomenon reveals something profound about creativity, originality, and the very nature of thought itself. Let's dig into the mechanics of how your brain pulls off this trick. When you experience something, read a book, watch a movie, have a conversation, your brain encodes that information into memory. But here's the thing, it doesn't stamp a clear label saying external source received on this date. Instead, it just stores the content, and over time the source information fades away faster than the actual idea. Weird psychology shows us that your brain prioritizes what was said over who said it, because evolutionarily speaking, useful information matters more than where it came from. Fast forward months or years, and that idea bubbles back up into your consciousness. But now it arrives without its origin story. It just feels like your own thinking. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena like this explain why parallel discoveries happen so often in science and art. Multiple people independently invent the same thing because they were all exposed to similar information and their brains independently reconstructed it as original thought. Think about how many people claim to have invented a recipe or discovered a life hack that's actually been around for generations. They're not liars. They're victims of their own memory system. Now here's where it gets really interesting for anyone creating content, building businesses, or trying to innovate. George Harrison, the legendary Beatles guitarist, released My Sweet Lord in 1970, a massive hit that became one of the best-selling singles of all time. There was just one problem. It was nearly identical to He's So Fine by the Chiffons, released 7 years earlier. Harrison was sued, and here's the fascinating part. The judge ruled that Harrison had committed subconscious plagiarism. He'd heard the song, forgotten about it, and years later his brain served it back up as his own creation. Harrison himself was shocked and genuinely believed he'd written something original. This same pattern appears everywhere. Authors who create characters that are actually composites of people they've met. Entrepreneurs who invent business models they once read about in obscure articles. Even chefs who design dishes they actually tasted years ago while traveling. Dark psychology research into cryptomnesia shows that the more information you consume, the more vulnerable you become to this phenomenon. Your brain is a remix machine, constantly blending inputs into new combinations, and sometimes those combinations aren't as new as they feel. But here's the real question you should be asking. Does cryptomnesia mean that true originality doesn't exist? Are all our ideas just recycled fragments of things we've absorbed? The answer is both unsettling and liberating. Yes, most of what you think is yours is actually built on foundations laid by others, but that doesn't make your contribution meaningless. Human behavior shows us that creativity is always combinatorial. Even Shakespeare borrowed plots from earlier stories. Einstein built on the work of countless physicists before him. The key is understanding how your mind works, so you can be honest about your influences and intentional about your synthesis. Books like Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon and Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson explore this concept beautifully, showing how all innovation is essentially sophisticated remixing. The solution isn't to panic about whether your thoughts are truly yours. It's to consume widely, acknowledge sources when you remember them, and understand that your unique perspective and combination of influences is what makes your work valuable. Weird psychology teaches us that the line between memory and imagination is far blurrier than we ever realized, and perhaps that's exactly what makes human creativity so endlessly fascinating. Transpersonal psychology and non-ordinary states of consciousness. There are moments when your sense of self completely dissolves, when the boundary between you and everything else just vanishes, and you experience something so vast and profound that normal language can't capture it. Maybe it happened during meditation, maybe in a moment of deep connection with nature, or perhaps during an intense emotional experience that cracked open your usual way of perceiving reality. This is the territory of transpersonal psychology, and it's where human behavior gets truly mystical. We're talking about states of consciousness that go beyond the everyday ego, beyond your personal identity, into experiences that feel universal, timeless, or even cosmic. Dark psychology might focus on the shadows of the mind, but transpersonal psychology explores the light, those peak experiences where people report feeling connected to something infinitely larger than themselves. The fascinating part: these aren't just religious or spiritual fantasies, they're documented psychological phenomena that happen across cultures throughout history, and they fundamentally change how people understand themselves and reality. Your normal waking consciousness is just one channel on an infinite dial, and most people never realize they can tune into other frequencies. Let's talk about what actually happens during these non-ordinary states, because understanding the mechanics makes them less mystical and more accessible. Your brain normally operates with a very specific configuration. Your default mode network is active, constantly narrating your experience, reinforcing your sense of being a separate individual with a continuous story. But certain conditions can temporarily shut down or significantly alter this network. Deep meditation does it. Psychedelic substances do it. Intense breathwork does it. Even extreme physical exertion like long-distance running can trigger it. When this happens, strange and unusual psychological phenomena emerge. People report feeling oceanic boundlessness, encountering entities or presences, experiencing ego death where their sense of individual self completely disappears, or having mystical revelations that feel more real than everyday reality. Neuroscience research shows that these states involve decreased activity in the brain regions responsible for self-referential thinking and increased connectivity between areas that don't normally communicate. It's like your brain temporarily rewires itself, allowing you to perceive reality through a completely different operating system. Studies from Johns Hopkins, Imperial College London, and other major institutions are now documenting these experiences scientifically, showing that they produce lasting positive changes in personality, creativity, and even treatment-resistant depression. Now here's where this gets practical, because these experiences aren't just for monks in caves or shamans in the Amazon. You can access these states, and doing so might be one of the most transformative things you ever do. Stanislav Grof, one of the founders of transpersonal psychology, spent decades mapping these territories and developed techniques like holotropic breathwork, a powerful breathing method that can induce non-ordinary states without any substances. His books, The Holotropic Mind and Psychology of the Future, are essential reading if you want to understand this landscape. Meanwhile, Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind documents the renaissance of psychedelic research and how substances like psilocybin are being used to trigger profound psychological healing through these transpersonal experiences. But you don't need drugs. Practices like Vipassana meditation, sensory deprivation tanks, or even extended time in wilderness solitude can open these doors. Weird psychology shows us that your consciousness is far more flexible and expansive than you've been taught to believe. The rigid sense of being a separate self trapped inside your skull, that's just one possible configuration, and it's not even the most accurate one. The implications of transpersonal psychology shake the foundations of how we understand the mind. If consciousness can extend beyond the individual, if people can have experiences that feel genuinely transpersonal, connected to other minds, to collective human experience, to something that transcends space and time, what does that mean for our materialist understanding of reality? Dark psychology explores the depths and shadows of human nature, but transpersonal psychology shows us the heights and the transcendent possibilities. People who have these experiences consistently report that they're among the most meaningful events of their entire lives, more significant than marriages, career achievements, or any conventional life milestone. They come back with reduced fear of death, increased sense of purpose, greater compassion, and a fundamental shift in values away from materialism and toward connection and meaning. Human behavior at this level reveals that we're not just biological machines grinding through existence. We're conscious beings capable of experiencing reality in ways that contemporary psychology is only beginning to acknowledge. The question isn't whether these states are real. The question is what they're showing you about the true nature of your mind and its relationship to the larger mystery of existence. Psychological analysis of paranormal belief and experience. Why do some people see ghosts while others see nothing? Why does your skeptical friend roll their eyes at astrology while you find eerily accurate insights in your birth chart? The psychology behind paranormal belief isn't about who's smart and who's gullible. It's far more complex and revealing than that. Human behavior, when it comes to the unexplained, tells us profound truths about how our minds construct reality, what we need to believe to feel safe, and how our brains fill in gaps when faced with uncertainty. Dark psychology researchers have spent decades studying why certain people are drawn to paranormal explanations while others dismiss them entirely, and the answers aren't what you'd expect. It's not about intelligence or education. Some of the brightest minds throughout history have held paranormal beliefs, while some of the most closed-minded people consider themselves rational skeptics. The real factors involve personality traits, cognitive styles, childhood experiences, and something even deeper, how comfortable you are with ambiguity and the unknown. Your relationship with the paranormal reveals how your mind deals with the fundamental mystery of existence itself. Let's break down what actually drives paranormal belief, because once you understand the psychology, these experiences make perfect sense. First, there's pattern. Recognition, your brain's superpower that kept your ancestors alive by spotting predators in the bushes. The problem? This system is incredibly sensitive and generates tons of false positives. It's better to see a face in the clouds and be wrong than to miss an actual threat and die. Weird psychology shows us that people with high pattern recognition abilities, often creative, intuitive types, are more likely to perceive meaningful connections in random events. They see the face in the clouds, hear voices in white noise, sense presences in empty rooms. Second, there's agency detection, your brain's tendency to assume that events have intentional causes rather than random ones. When something moves in your peripheral vision, your brain instinctively thinks someone's there rather than wind moved a curtain. This kept your ancestors alive, but in modern environments, it creates ghost sightings, feelings of being watched, and supernatural attributions. Third, there's confirmation bias. Once you believe something might be true, you unconsciously collect evidence that supports it while dismissing contradictions. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena emerge when these normal cognitive processes combine with cultural narratives about what's possible. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The experiences themselves are often completely real, even when the paranormal explanation isn't. Someone who sees a ghost isn't necessarily making it up or hallucinating. They're having a genuine perceptual experience that their brain is interpreting through a paranormal framework. Sleep paralysis explains many demon encounters and alien abduction experiences. You're awake, but your body is still in REM sleep paralysis, and your brain generates terrifying presences to explain why you can't move. Infrasound, low-frequency vibrations below human hearing, can create feelings of dread, visual distortions, and even the sensation of a ghostly presence. Studies have shown that supposedly haunted locations often have high levels of infrasound from old machinery, wind through building structures, or geological activity. Carbon monoxide poisoning has explained numerous haunted house cases where entire families experienced apparitions and strange sounds. They were literally being poisoned, and their oxygen-deprived brains created the paranormal narrative. Dark psychology research reveals that people who've experienced trauma, particularly in childhood, are significantly more likely to report paranormal experiences, not because they're damaged, but because trauma can alter perception, increase sensitivity to environmental cues, and create a worldview where invisible threats feel very real. But here's the question that really matters. Are paranormal believers simply wrong, or are they perceiving something that mainstream science hasn't figured out how to measure yet? The honest answer is that we don't know, and anyone who claims absolute certainty either way is lying. Human behavior shows us that reality is far stranger than the materialist paradigm allows. Quantum mechanics reveals that observation affects reality, that particles can be entangled across vast distances, that the universe operates on principles that seem magical when compared to everyday experience. Dean Radin's The Conscious Universe and Rupert Sheldrake's Science Set Free present rigorous research suggesting that phenomena like telepathy and precognition show statistical effects that, while small, are remarkably consistent across thousands of experiments. Meanwhile, skeptics like Michael Shermer in The Believing Brain explain how these same results can emerge from methodological flaws and cognitive biases. The truth, weird psychology tells us that the line between perception and reality is far blurrier than we pretend. Your brain doesn't show you objective reality. It constructs a model based on sensory input, prior beliefs, and neurological processes we barely understand. Whether paranormal experiences represent genuine contact with non-physical realities or reveal the spectacular creative power of the human mind to generate meaning from mystery, either way they're teaching us something profound about consciousness itself. Quantum models of perception and consciousness. What if your brain doesn't work like a computer at all, but more like a quantum system that exists in multiple states simultaneously until the moment you observe something? This isn't science fiction. It's a legitimate area of research that's blowing apart everything we thought we knew about human behavior and consciousness. For decades, neuroscience treated the brain as a classical machine. Neurons fire, signals transmit, computations happen, and boom, consciousness emerges. Simple, clean, mechanistic. But there's a massive problem with this model. It can't explain some of the most basic features of consciousness, like how you can hold multiple contradictory thoughts at once, how decisions seem to emerge from nowhere, or how your perception can shift dramatically based on subtle changes in attention. Enter quantum models of consciousness, where researchers propose that the brain might be leveraging quantum effects, superposition, entanglement, wave function collapse, to do things that classical computation simply cannot achieve. Dark psychology meets quantum physics in this space, revealing that your mind might be operating on principles that seem absolutely impossible according to everyday logic. Let's talk about what this actually means, because quantum mechanics sounds intimidating, but the core ideas are weirdly intuitive once you get past the jargon. In quantum systems, particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, a phenomenon called superposition. They're not here or there, they're here and there, until someone observes them, at which point the superposition collapses into one definite state. Now imagine your brain doing something similar, with perceptions and possibilities. When you look at an ambiguous image, like the famous duck-rabbit illusion, your brain holds both interpretations in superposition until your attention collapses it into one or the other. Weird psychology researchers like Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose have proposed that consciousness arises from quantum processes in microtubules, tiny structures inside neurons that might be capable of maintaining quantum coherence. If true, this would mean your thoughts aren't just electrochemical signals bouncing around, they're quantum events where multiple possibilities exist simultaneously until the moment of conscious awareness. Strange and unusual. Psychological phenomena suddenly make more sense. Precognitive dreams might involve quantum effects, where future possibilities influence present states. Intuitive hunches might be your brain processing quantum information that classical logic can't access, and the observer effect in psychology, where simply observing something changes it, mirrors the observer effect in quantum mechanics. Now here's where this gets practical and mind-blowing at the same time. If your brain operates partially on quantum principles, it means your consciousness has capabilities that go far beyond what traditional neuroscience predicts. Think about creativity. How? Completely novel ideas seem to emerge from nowhere, fully formed. Classical computation can only recombine existing elements. It can't create genuine novelty. But quantum computation can explore multiple solution paths simultaneously, collapsing into the optimal answer, without having to check each possibility sequentially. Your creative insights might literally be quantum processes, exploring vast possibility spaces in parallel, then collapsing into that aha moment when you consciously grasp the solution. Or consider intuition, that gut feeling that knows something before your rational mind can explain why. Dark psychology has documented countless cases where people's intuitions proved correct despite having no logical basis for their knowledge. If consciousness involves quantum entanglement, your brain might be picking up on subtle correlations in your environment that classical perception misses entirely. Books like Quantum Enigma by Bruce Rosenblum and Fred Kuttner and The Quantum Mind and Healing by Arnold Mindell explore these connections, showing how quantum principles might explain healing, synchronicity, and the power of focused attention to shape reality. The implications of quantum consciousness models are absolutely staggering for understanding human behavior. If your mind operates on quantum principles, then the hard problem of consciousness, how subjective experience arises from physical matter, might have a completely different answer than we've been assuming. Maybe consciousness isn't created by the brain. Maybe the brain is a quantum antenna that tunes into consciousness, much like a radio doesn't create music but receives signals that exist independently. This would explain why people report expanded awareness during near-death experiences when brain activity is minimal, why meditation can access states that feel more real than ordinary consciousness, and why weird psychology keeps bumping into phenomena that materialist neuroscience can't adequately explain. Critics argue that the brain is too warm and noisy for quantum coherence to survive, but recent research shows that quantum effects can persist in biological systems far longer than previously thought. Photosynthesis uses quantum coherence, birds navigate using quantum entanglement in their visual systems, and your sense of smell might operate on quantum principles. Whether quantum models fully explain consciousness or just contribute to it, they're revealing that your mind is far stranger, far more powerful, and far more connected to the fundamental fabric of reality than conventional psychology ever imagined possible. Liminal space psychology, the mind in transitional environments. You know that eerie feeling you get in an empty shopping mall after hours, or walking through a hotel hallway at 3 a.m., or standing in an abandoned parking garage where everything feels slightly off? That unsettling sensation isn't random. It's your brain responding to what psychologists call liminal space, and understanding why these environments affect you so powerfully reveals fascinating truths about human behavior. Liminal comes from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold. These are in-between places, transitional zones that exist for passage rather than destination. They're meant to be full of people and purpose, but when they're empty, something breaks in your perception. Your brain expects certain environments to contain specific elements. Airports should have travelers, schools should have students, hallways should lead somewhere meaningful. When these expectations shatter, when you encounter spaces that feel frozen between states, your psychology responds with a cocktail of unease, fascination, and sometimes genuine fear. Dark psychology researchers have discovered that liminal spaces trigger ancient survival mechanisms, tapping into deeply wired responses that kept your ancestors alert in unfamiliar territory. Let's dig into what's actually happening in your brain when you encounter these transitional environments, because the mechanism is both elegant and disturbing. First, there's cognitive dissonance. Your mind holds a template for how certain spaces should function, and empty liminal spaces violate that template completely. A school hallway exists to connect classrooms full of students, teachers, and activity. When you see it empty and silent, your brain experiences a mismatch between expectation and reality that creates psychological tension. Second, there's the absence of human presence in spaces designed for humans. Weird psychology shows us that your brain is constantly scanning for social cues, faces, voices, signs of other people, because throughout evolution, isolation meant vulnerability. Empty spaces that should contain people trigger low-level threat detection, activating your amygdala and creating that crawling sensation on your skin. Third, there's temporal ambiguity. Liminal spaces exist outside normal time. You can't tell if it's morning or midnight in a fluorescent-lit office corridor, if you've been walking for 2 minutes or 20. This temporal distortion creates disorientation that your brain interprets as potential danger. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena emerge when these factors combine with architectural features like repeating patterns, harsh lighting and acoustics that make every sound feel wrong. Now here's where liminal space psychology connects to something much deeper about consciousness and reality perception. These environments don't just make you uncomfortable, they reveal the constructed nature of your everyday experience. Your normal waking life exists within predictable frameworks, schedules, purposes, social contexts, familiar landmarks. Liminal spaces strip all that away, leaving you in a kind of psychological void where the usual rules don't apply. This is why they've become a massive phenomenon online. The backrooms creepypasta, liminal space photography communities, and aesthetic movements celebrating this specific form of unease. People are drawn to these images and experiences because they tap into something primal, the recognition that reality itself is more fragile and constructed than we like to admit. Dark psychology research into liminal experiences shows they can trigger dissociative states where your sense of self becomes unmoored from its usual anchors. Time feels weird, your body feels distant, and you experience a strange combination of anxiety and curiosity. This is your mind operating without its normal scaffolding, and for some people these states open doors to creative insights, philosophical realizations, or even spiritual experiences. Artists and writers throughout history have sought out liminal spaces specifically to access these altered states. Think of how many horror stories take place in empty hotels, abandoned hospitals, or endless corridors that seem to exist outside reality. But here's what makes liminal space psychology truly fascinating. These environments are teaching you something crucial about human behavior and the nature of consciousness itself. Every moment of your life, your brain is constructing a coherent narrative about who you are, where you are, and what everything means. This narrative feels solid and real, but it's actually a fragile construction that depends on constant sensory confirmation and social validation. Liminal spaces disrupt this construction, showing you the machinery behind the curtain. When you feel unsettled in an empty parking structure or an overnight gas station, you're not being irrational. You're experiencing the temporary collapse of the meaning-making systems that usually run automatically. Weird psychology tells us that this can actually be valuable. Some therapists use controlled exposure to liminal environments to help people confront existential anxiety, practice tolerating uncertainty, and realize that their sense of self doesn't depend on external validation. Books like The Anthropology of Hallways by Exploring Architectural Psychology, or fiction like Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves that turns liminal space into narrative, help us understand why these in-between zones exert such powerful psychological effects. The Aisito. Next time you find yourself in a transitional space and feel that characteristic unease, don't just push it away. Pay attention. Your mind is showing you something true about the constructed, provisional nature of everyday reality, and in that recognition lies a strange kind of freedom. So here you are, standing at the end of this journey through the hidden corridors of your own mind, and the real question is, what are you going to do with all this knowledge? Because let me be brutally honest with you, information without application is just entertainment, and you didn't make it this far just to be entertained. You now understand that your thoughts can betray you through ironic process theory, that your original ideas might be cryptomnesia in disguise, that your consciousness can access states beyond the everyday ego, and that your perception extends into territories that mainstream science barely acknowledges. You've seen how human behavior operates on principles, far stranger than the neat little boxes psychology textbooks try to squeeze it into. Dark psychology has shown you the shadows, transpersonal psychology has shown you the light, and quantum models have revealed that your mind might be operating on principles that seem like magic, but are actually cutting-edge physics. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Knowing all this means absolutely nothing if you don't use it to transform how you live, think, and navigate reality. Are you going to go back to pretending that consciousness is simple, that perception is straightforward, that the feeling of being watched is just paranoia? Or are you going to start paying attention to the deeper signals your nervous system is constantly sending you? Let me ask you something that might sting a little. How many times have you ignored your intuition and regretted it later? How many times have you felt something was off, dismissed it as irrational, and then discovered you were absolutely right? Your brain is processing information through channels you've been taught to distrust, strange and unusual psychological phenomena that your education system, your culture, and maybe even your own rational mind have trained you to ignore. But now you know better. You understand that when you feel someone behind you, when you sense a presence in an empty room, when you have a creative insight that seems to come from nowhere, when you experience a moment of connection that transcends normal communication, these aren't glitches or illusions. They're your consciousness operating at full capacity, leveraging mechanisms that conventional psychology hasn't figured out how to measure yet. So what changes tomorrow? Do you start trusting those gut feelings instead of talking yourself out of them? Do you pay attention when you walk into a liminal space and your entire nervous system starts screaming warnings? Do you stop fighting intrusive thoughts and start observing them with detached curiosity? Do you explore practices like meditation, breathwork, or sensory deprivation that can unlock non-ordinary states of consciousness? The knowledge is useless unless you actually experiment with it, test it against your lived experience, and integrate it into how you move through the world. Here's what I want you to really sit with. Weird psychology has shown you that reality is far more malleable and mysterious than you've been led to believe. And that means your potential is vastly greater than you've been taught to expect. If quantum models of consciousness are even partially correct, your focused attention might literally shape probability fields around you. If transpersonal experiences are genuine glimpses into larger consciousness, then your individual mind is just one small expression of something infinitely vaster. If you can sense when someone is watching you without conventional sensory input, what other information are you receiving and dismissing every single day? The mystics and shamans throughout history weren't delusional. They were exploring territories of human behavior that modern science is only now beginning to map. You have access to the same territories, the same states, the same expanded awareness that they discovered, but it requires something from you. The willingness to question everything you think you know about the limits of perception, the courage to trust experiences that don't fit the materialist paradigm, and the discipline to actually practice techniques that expand consciousness rather than just reading about them. Are you going to be one of those people who learns fascinating information and does nothing with it? Or are you going to actually experiment with the practices, test the theories, and discover what your mind is truly capable of when you stop limiting it to the narrow bandwidth of normal awareness? Look, I'm going to level with you one last time. You've just absorbed knowledge that most people will never encounter, because most people are too comfortable with the simple, sanitized version of psychology they learned in school. Dark psychology, strange and unusual psychological phenomena, transpersonal states, quantum consciousness, liminal space effects. This is the advanced material, the stuff that reveals how profoundly weird and wonderful human behavior actually is when you dig beneath the surface. But this channel exists to keep going deeper, to explore every strange corner of the mind, to question every assumption about consciousness and reality. If you found value in this exploration, if something here clicked or challenged you or opened a door you didn't know existed, then you need to subscribe and hit that notification bell right now, because we're just getting started. There are dozens more psychological phenomena waiting to be explored, more mysteries about consciousness that science can't explain, more practical techniques for expanding your awareness and accessing states that most people never experience. Don't let this be a one-time thing. Make it the beginning of a genuine transformation in how you understand yourself and reality. Subscribe, activate notifications, and commit to this journey of discovering what your mind is really capable of. The strange, the unusual, the unexplained. That's where the real knowledge lives. And I'll be here mapping that territory every single upload. So what's it going to be? Are you in, or are you going back to comfortable ignorance?